hockey fans, Nick Hart here. Hope you all have been enjoying yourselves as the temperatures start to chill outside. Hope you're all staying safe, staying sane, staying smart, and staying comfortable. We've had no hockey to talk about since the Tampa Bay Lightning clinched their franchise's second Stanley Cup back in late September, and it looks like we're going to have to be a little bit patient before you and I can chat sticks and pucks again. Still no official word yet on when the NHL will start its next season, or for that matter, when we can see the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins on the ice again. If you're like me, you cannot wait until we can see what the Penguins have in store for this upcoming season. They're a club that has built a reputation for forging fruitful pro careers for countless players, all while demanding the highest standard of play and winning tons of games at the American Hockey League level. No player in Wilkes-Barre Scranton history represents this standard of the Penguins more than Tom Kostopoulos, a fan favorite, of course, the franchise leader in just about every single category in franchise history. And because of what he represents to the Penguins, and because we're not going to be actually talking hockey for a while, we're going to do something a little fun. We're starting a new video series called 6 Degrees of Tom Kostopoulos. Perhaps many of you are familiar with the long-memed internet game, Degrees of Kevin Bacon, where by sifting through a couple IMDb pages, anyone in show business can be connected back to actor Kevin Bacon. Well, given Kostopoulos' incredible career that spanned 19 seasons, and remember now, he's one of only 4 players in hockey history to log over 600 games at both the NHL and AHL levels. Because of that, I think we can connect anyone, any hockey player to TK. Old legends, recent heroes, it doesn't matter. I bet they're all only a few degrees of separation from Tom Kostopoulos, and we're going to prove it. But first, before this fun little experiment begins, let's lay down some ground rules. Number 1, the players we start with will be NHLers from any era and from any team starting with 1942, the start of what's colloquially known as the Original Six era. So 1942 is our starting point. They are NHLers, but from any era and any team as long as they're in that time frame. Rule number 2, we have to try and connect that person to Tom Kostopoulos by jumping from teammate to teammate to teammate until somebody has played with TK. So just for the sake of an example, let's say we started with Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky played with this guy, who played with this guy, who played with that guy, who played with Tom Kostopoulos. Each step we take counts as 1 degree of separation. We want to try and connect the original player to Tom Kostopoulos with as few degrees as possible. We don't want to get up to 100 degrees, 300 degrees. No, we want to try and do it in as few steps as possible. Rule number 3, we'll start each game with an NHLer, but we can connect our dots to Tom Kostopoulos using teammates from any level of hockey. It doesn't just have to be the NHL. It could be the NHL, could be the AHL, college hockey, juniors, etc. However, to make things more challenging as we go along, we've instituted rule number 4. Throughout this video series, we can never, ever use the same player twice to connect to Tom Kostopoulos. So, for example, take Tampa Bay Lightning forward Nikita Kucherov. Kucherov played junior hockey with Jean-Sébastien Dea, who played with Tom Kostopoulos in Wilkes-Barre Scranton. That's only 2 degrees of separation. But we can now never use JSD again to connect someone to Tom Kostopoulos. So let's take New Jersey Devils forward Kyle Palmieri. If he showed up, we can't use JSD to connect Kyle Palmieri to Tom Kostopoulos. We have to go a different route, find a different path. This rule that we've instituted has the potential to make things very difficult as we go along in this video series and the deeper down the rabbit hole we go. So what do you say, folks? Are you down for 6 degrees of Tom Kostopoulos? Well, if you're not, too bad. We're doing these videos anyway, but for those of you that are on board, or those of you that are still a little fuzzy on how this works, let me show you how it's going to go down. Let's not waste any more time and enjoy our very first edition of 6 Degrees of Tom Kostopoulos and see how many steps it takes us to connect someone to the beloved captain of Penguins past. Our very first player will allow us to take a long walk down the halls of hockey history. Today, we're going to connect TK to Boston Bruins legend Dick Clapper. Like Kostopoulos, Clapper enjoyed a long career as a pro hockey player. He suited up for 19 full seasons in the NHL, all of which were played as a member of the Bruins from 1927 to 1946. In fact, he even gave it a go for a 20th season when he was 39 years old, but he was limited to just 6 games in that season. Still, despite not making it through the whole year, Clapper made NHL history as the first player to suit up in 20 consecutive seasons, and boy, did he make those 2 decades count. Born Aubrey Victor Clapper in Newmarket, Ontario, Dit, as he became to be known, turned pro at 19 years of age playing for the Boston Tigers of the short-lived Canadian-American Hockey League. After 1 season, Art Ross and the Bruins bought Clapper's rights from the Tigers, and on his very first shift of what would be a legendary tenure with the Bees, Clapper scored his first NHL goal. Ross even moved Clapper from defense to right wing shortly after joining the team, and the Bruins won the franchise's first Stanley Cup in Clapper's second season with the club, 1928-29. After that championship, Clapper evolved into one of the league's best players, scoring 41 goals in 44 games in 1929-30 and led the Bruins to 2 more Stanley Cups before he called it a career. Dick Clapper also served as the Bruins captain for 13 of his 20 seasons, and he acted as the team's player coach for 2 seasons as well. In 883 NHL games played, either on the front lines or on the blue line, Clapper amassed 228 goals and 246 assists for 474 total points. He was one of only 2 players ever to make the NHL All-Star team as both a forward and a defenseman. And when he retired in 1947, the Bruins promptly retired Clapper's number 5 forever. Furthermore, the same night that the Bees retired his number, the Hockey Hall of Fame waived their standard waiting period for induction, and at that time, Dick Clapper became the only living member of the Hockey Hall of Fame. A seismic career and impressive resume for sure, but how are we going to connect Clapper to Kostopoulos, and in how many steps can we do it? That's the key. We got to go from the 40s all the way up to Tom Kostopoulos. So how are we going to do it, folks? Well, let's start by looking at Clapper's teammate, FERN FLAMAN. FLAMAN played defense for over 900 games in the NHL, and he was a teammate and I suppose a student to Clapper in the latter's career twilight as player-coach. And like Clapper, FLAMAN spent a long time as Boston Bruins captain, wearing the C for 6 seasons from 1955 to 1961. But unlike Clapper, FLAMAN didn't exclusively suit up for Boston. The gifted and hard-nosed D-man also played parts of 4 seasons for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he had several AHL stints, including games played with the Hershey Bears and the Pittsburgh Hornets. FLAMAN spent his last 3 seasons as a professional hockey player as player-coach of the AHL's Providence Reds, some regular Reggie Dunlops in this video today, and he later retired in 1964. FLAMAN also went on to tally 19 seasons behind the bench in the NCAA as the head coach of the Northeastern University Huskies, and he was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1990. But 30 years prior to his induction to the Hall of Fame, back on November 10, 1960, a veteran, Fernie FLAMAN, looked down the Boston Bruins bench and saw a young teammate making his NHL debut. And that 20-year-old whippersnapper was defenseman Ted Green. In fact, that night was the only time, just one game, that FLAMAN and Green skated as teammates. But it's enough to be our second step on the way to Tom Kostopoulos. So Green made his NHL debut that night for the Bruins, the lone game he'd played for the Bees that year, before solidifying himself a spot in Boston's lineup for 10 seasons and striking the fear of God into opponents during that time. In fact, he became known as Terrible Ted Green for his crushing and pugilistic physical play, backed up by the fact that he eclipsed over 100 penalty minutes 6 times in his career. But he wasn't just a bruiser. Green led all NHL defensemen with 36 assists during the 1967-68 campaign, then followed that up by eclipsing that mark with a career-high 38 assists and 46 points in 68-69. That year, Ted Green finished third in Norris Trophy voting, just behind two little-known names, Tim Horton and Bruins teammate Bobby Orr. Maybe you've heard of them. But let's face it, sometimes rabid dogs are going to bite. You don't get the name Terrible Ted Green for nothing, and unfortunately, living up to that reputation cost him a ring. After his career-best season in 68-69, Green engaged in what became an infamous altercation with St. Louis Blues forward Wayne Mackey in a preseason game, but instead of dropping the gloves, their raging tempers led them to swing their sticks at one another. The event ended in bloodshed, and Green suffered a fractured skull and minor brain damage as a result of the bout, and in fact, both Mackey and Green were charged with assault. It was the first instance of NHL players facing legal charges for an on-ice incident, although both players were later acquitted of those charges. But the damage was done. Green missed all of the 1969-70 season, a run that ended with the Bruins winning the Stanley Cup. Now, Green's teammates made sure that his name was still inscribed on the cup that year, but he made sure to get one for himself when he returned to the ice for Boston in 1970-71 and hoisted Lord Stanley's Cup at the end of his last NHL season, 1972. After his NHL career closed, Green continued to play pro hockey, dressing for 7 seasons in the brand new World Hockey Association. Remember the WHA? He was the very first captain for the upstart New England Whalers, and then played out the final 4 years of his career with the Winnipeg Jets, where he was a teammate of Kent Nilsson. The Swedish forward was a sensation for the Jets the moment he made the jump from overseas to the WHA in 1977. Right out of the gate, Nilsson racked up 107 points in his first season with the Jets, good enough to be crowned WHA Rookie of the Year. He then matched that total in his second year and won the Paul Deneau Trophy as the WHA's most gentlemanly player while earning the nickname Magic Man. After 2 seasons of dominance, Kent Nilsson left Winnipeg as the WHA folded and several teams merged with the NHL, including the Jets. However, Winnipeg was unable to retain Nilsson's rights as the Atlanta Flames had taken him in the NHL entry draft 3 seasons prior. But his mesmerizing skills translated from the WHA to the NHL, as did his offensive production. In his first season with the Flames, Nilsson amassed 40 goals and 93 points. Then, 1 year later, when the team relocated from Atlanta to Calgary, he erupted for career bests across the board with 49 goals and 82 assists for a whopping 131 points. To this day, that is still the most points in a season by a Swedish-born player in NHL history. Unfortunately, Nilsson's teams rarely experienced any postseason success. In his first 7 NHL seasons with Atlanta, Calgary, and the Minnesota North Stars, his teams only advanced past the first round twice, and they never won a second-round matchup. That long stretch of postseason unsuccess all changed in 1987 when Glenn Sather, the then GM of the Edmonton Oilers, acquired Nilsson from Minnesota in exchange for a second-round pick and cash considerations. The Magic Man then went on to produce 19 points in 21 playoff games for the Oil and won the Stanley Cup. No word on how cash considerations ended up playing for Minnesota. But then Nilsson quickly shocked everyone by departing the NHL after capturing the game's top prize and left to play in Switzerland and Italy. His NHL career ended abruptly, but he left with 686 points in 553 games. That is the second highest points per game clip by a Swede in league history. He went on to capture championships in Italy and his native Sweden, and he was named to the International Ice Hockey Federation Hall of Fame in 2006. Now get this, folks. Nilsson's son, Robert Nilsson, actually played for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins in 2006-07, and though he did not play with Tom Kostopoulos that year, he played alongside a bevy of players who did suit up with Kostopoulos in northeastern Pennsylvania, but we said we wanted to get to TK in as few steps as possible. So in order to do that, we wouldn't go through Kent Nilsson's son, but rather someone who was right there celebrating with Nilsson on the ice, celebrating that Stanley Cup championship in 1987. I'm talking about Kelly Buchberger. Kelly Buchberger was an honest, hardworking, and big-bodied forward drafted by Edmonton in the 9th round of the 1985 NHL draft. He spent one more season after that playing for Moose Jaw in the Western Hockey League before graduating to the AHL in 1986-87. And while playing for Edmonton's farm club on the opposite side of the country in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Buchberger earned 12 goals, 20 assists, and 32 points. Respectable totals for a rookie pro, but he really grabbed attention with his 257 penalty minutes. Not enough to place top 10 in the league in that category back in those days, but still, 257 PIMs as a rookie is nothing to shake a stick at. And it was enough to earn the confidence of Glenn Sather, who called Buchberger up for extra insurance during that Oilers playoff run in 1987. He didn't play a single regular season game for Edmonton that year, but he appeared in 3 games during the Stanley Cup final against Philadelphia and even dropped the gloves with the Flyers' Dave Brown in Game 1 of that championship series. Buchberger required a little bit more seasoning in the AHL before locking down a full-time position in Edmonton, but that's exactly what he did, and once he did, he was a much more of an integral piece in the team's championship victory in 1990, the team's 5th title in 7 years. The pride of Langenburg, Saskatchewan became a staple in the Oilers lineup over the next decade, commanding a healthy respect from teammates and opponents alike. In fact, Buchberger spent 4 seasons wearing the C as Edmonton's captain and even played in 3 of Canada's entries at the IIHF Men's World Championship, including a gold medal outing in 1994. The 9th round pick Buchberger eventually played 1,182 NHL games and almost doubled that with 2,297 career penalty minutes. He became a journeyman towards the end of his career, providing toughness and locker room leadership for 4 teams in his last 5 seasons of his NHL tenure. Those teams included the Atlanta Thrashers, Los Angeles Kings, Phoenix Coyotes, and the Pittsburgh Penguins, where he played his last NHL season in 2003-04 and was a teammate and mentor to a young Tom Kostopoulos. 5 degrees of separation on that walk down memory lane from Hall of Famer Dick Clapper to the great Tom Kostopoulos. From the 1940s to 2004, plus plenty of great players and interesting stories on this particular journey too. It took us 5 steps to get from Clapper to TK, a good starting point for our first video in this series. Now, it's not always going to be like this. When we engage in 6 degrees of Tom Kostopoulos, some of these will be even fewer steps to get from point A to TK. Some of them might even be longer than 5, 6, 7 steps. We might go down some long and winding roads. You'll have to check back and see, folks, but we'll run it back one more time to review our first installment of 6 degrees of Tom Kostopoulos. We started with Boston Bruins legend and Hall of Famer Dick Clapper, who played with Boston Bruins legend and Hall of Famer FERN FLAMAN, who shared the ice for one game with terrible Ted Green, who played alongside Kent Nilsson in the WHA, who hoisted the Stanley Cup as a teammate of Kelly Buchberger, who played with Tom Kostopoulos in Pittsburgh. Now a reminder, we cannot use any of these players in our future videos. Never again will we connect someone to Tom Kostopoulos through Kelly Buchberger or Ted Green. Cross them off the list, folks. We'll be back with another edition of 6 Degrees of Tom Kostopoulos next week. Hope you enjoyed the pilot episode. We've got many more to come. Stay safe out there, everyone. Happy hockey, everybody. See you next week.